Well, guys, it's officially midnight, which means it's officially 2020.
Well, I'm glad 2019's over because that new Star Wars movie sucked. I hope 2020's better.
Guys, don't worry. It's 2020. What could possibly go wrong?
One eternity later.
You know, I should probably stop saying that every single year. 2020 was a different year for everyone. In other words, it was hell. I mean, come on. It was incredibly hard last year to get new credits and visit new parks, and some parks didn't even open for the whole year. I'm looking at you, Valley Fair. But anyway, last year, during all the madness and the toilet paper stuff, I actually went to 2 parks last year. The first one being Arnolds Park in Iowa. I mean, at this point, I've already been to Adventureland, so I had no idea there was another park in Iowa. Until one day, when I was browsing Google Maps, and I came across this park called Arnolds Park in northern Iowa. And I just had to go because, well, at that time, it was one of the only parks in the world that was actually open. So I went to the park's website, and I bought a ticket for about $30, I remember. Which isn't a bad price, but just keep in mind the at the gate price is about $35, so if you want to save $5, then well, pay online. Anyway, on July 3rd, I finally pack all my stuff and I drive me and my dad down to Iowa. And yes, I drove this time, which is actually my first time driving to a park, and oh boy, the drive was really boring. For those who don't know, Iowa has corn, and a lot of it. The GPS said it would take about 2 hours to get to Arnold's Park, which it felt like 2 days because all we saw was corn. So after about 2 hours of driving through nothing but cornfields, we eventually came to Lake Okoboji, Iowa. And I had no idea there's lakes in Iowa, so this is pretty amazing. And then we finally made it to Arnold's Park, and get this, parking was free. I mean, most parks cost about $20 for parking, so this was a nice change. Anyway, speeding up, we walk to the front entrance, get our tickets punched, and we walk in to the park. And now it is time to review this park. So the first category is... So, out of all the parks I've been to, Arnold's Park has the least amount of roller coasters of any park lineup I've ever seen. 3 total roller coasters, and one of them is a kiddie coaster, which I couldn't ride because I was too old. But that's okay. I can shake it off like a real man. So that means we're left with 2 roller coasters. Let's first talk about the Legend, which is the park's biggest coaster and the only wooden coaster in the park. So, the Legend, okay, it was pretty good. I thought it was a very fun time. It's actually a really old roller coaster. It was built in the 1920s, and it's actually pretty smooth for how old it is. I'm serious, this coaster is actually really smooth. And this roller coaster is located next to a lake, so this automatically has some of the best views in the park. So enough jibber jabber about that. How was the roller coaster experience? Well, it was fine. It got the job done, but it really wasn't anything too special. I've already talked about this roller coaster in a previous video, so I'm going to briefly go through this roller coaster. So, first drop, it sucks. The turnaround has some airtime to it going out of it, a little bit airtime on the way to the second turnaround, and a little bit airtime on the way back to the station. But other than that, nothing too special. But in my opinion, it was good enough. It was the first roller coaster I rode in 2020, and I'm extremely thankful I got to ride it during the pandemic. And I also rode it in the back row with Renegade Mike, so huge shout out to that guy. Really fun, and honestly, this roller coaster is only a back row ride. The front row is kind of fun, but if you want the best experience, the back row is where it's at. But what if Legend's not doing it for you, and you hate happiness? Well then, let me introduce you to the only steel coaster in Arnold's Park. This is Wild Mouse, and this roller coaster is, something else. This thing sucks. On the outside, it looks like this normal Wild Mouse coaster you can find at pretty much every single amusement park, But this one was actually built in the 1950s, and yes, it was relocated to Arnold's Park a couple years ago, but it's still a really old ride and kind of cool in some ways. First off, the layout is pretty interesting compared to other Wild Mouse roller coasters. There's a lot of turns that are not super sharp, but they're still kind of weird, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And the second thing is, the restraints are pretty much non-existent. There's only a seatbelt to hold you in, and that's it. And the cars, well, they can only hold 2 people, but it's usually around 1 person if you're a bigger guy. And the way you sit down in the thing kind of feels like you're in a tub or something. But don't get too comfy because this ride is rattly to the bone. This ride has some of the worst rattling I've ever seen. And yes, I get it, it's an old roller coaster, but still, it was not a pleasant experience. Wild Mouse is like a trip to the chiropractor gone wrong. It was so rough. It hurt my neck, it hurt my sides, it hurt my butt. I could rant for days on this roller coaster, but we don't have that much time, and I think you get my point. Wild Mouse is one of the worst roller coasters I have ever been on. Alright, so that's it for the roller coasters. Let's move on to the next part of this video. Does Arnold's Park have flat rides? Sure. I mean, yeah, there's your typical Ferris wheel and carousel ride, which are great crowd pleasers, and there's also kiddie rides, which basically is 80% of their lineup. So, nothing too special, but there is about 3 rides that do stand out. Let's first talk about Rolloplane, which is easily one of the best rides in the park. This is basically like a Ferris wheel on steroids, and it has a little spunk to it. So yeah, you go in a circular motion, but the main thing here is that your cars can actually do a full 360. Just kidding. Yeah, for some reason, I wasn't able to do a full 360, which is weird because that's how I always thought it would be. I was actually trying really hard, but I just couldn't get a full revolution. It was so disappointing. But it was still fun, and it was kind of a cool and rare ride. You don't really see these at any other parks because, well, they're kind of old. Alright, next let's talk about Rockoplane. I'm sorry, I mean Rolloplane. These 2 names are really confusing. So this ride's basically the same concept as Rockoplane, but a little bit different at the same time. You see, this time instead of going for a 360, you do a barrel roll, which is kind of the same thing. But I couldn't experience it for myself because this ride was closed the day I went. So yeah, that's not fun. Alright, let's talk about Bogey Falls, the park's log chute. And oh boy, is it a log chute. Bogey Falls is your typical log flume ride, but a little bit different at the same time. First off, this log flume looks a lot sketchier. It just never looked sturdy enough to me. Like, when I was on it, I was kind of worried it would topple over. Anyway, you go through this course that's pretty typical for a log chute. You go up a little lift, and you kind of go through this kind of river, I guess you can call it. And then you go for the plunge, and this plunge was pretty fun until you hit the water. So you know how regular log chute rides have cold water splash at you because during the hot summer days it feels nice to have cold water on you. But nope, this water was not cold at all. In fact, it was pretty lukewarm, and it felt pretty weird. Also, the water smelled, kind of funky. It smelled like dog water. Okay, listen, I don't know if it was the lake water or something, but if it's chemical water, then God knows what kind of chemicals they put in there because it smelled bad. Anyway, moving on, there's this kind of monster-like ride, or octopus, whatever you call it, that has kind of funky colors going with it, and it looks pretty fun, but I didn't ride it. There is also a funhouse, which looked pretty weird, but I couldn't go in it because, you know, COVID, you can't really be inside touching stuff all the time, so it was closed for the whole season. But other than that, there's a Dippin' Dots location, some more restaurants, a couple of gift shops, and there's a boat museum, which my dad thought that was pretty cool, so, you know, whatever. But now it's time for the third and final segment. Alright, park atmosphere, and to be honest, Arnold's Park's atmosphere was very refreshing. It kind of felt like I was in a time machine and I traveled all the way back to a park in the 1950s, which this park is pretty much that, because every ride here is not from the 21st century. Like, it is old stuff, and it's so cool. You see, everything about this tiny little park is just so classic and charming. And plus, the staff here are very, very friendly, especially the ride ops here. I've actually had a few conversations with these employees, and they've been delightful. At the front gate, I was in a conversation with this old timer talking about Valley Fair. It was just talking about all the roller coasters and rides we liked and how much we like Valley Fair. And it's like a littlest thing, but it goes a long way. The staff here are super friendly. And overall, this park just gives off some pretty good vibes, you know, like small hometown park. Very, very cute and very, very charming. So, is Arnold's Park worth your time? It strongly depends. Listen, I love this park, but it's just so tucked back and far away in the middle of nowhere that it's really hard to get to this park if you're an average enthusiast like in Ohio or something. It's definitely not something to go out of your way for, but if you're in the area, then I strongly recommend checking this thing out. Because you can basically do everything in this park in less than an hour if it's not super busy. And even though this park doesn't have the greatest coaster collection or flat ride collection, and there's a little bit of flaws here and there, this park is still so much fun. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, is that you had fun, which this park certainly does that. Overall, I like Arnold's Park. It's not a perfect park by any means, but it's still a really cute and charming park and full of great rides. Except for Wild Mouse. That coaster was so bad, I need therapy.